So as I said, I am going to go through our restart plan here with you. Um, Thank you so much for all of the questions that you submitted. It was really helpful in knowing how to sort of craft what we wanted to share with you this evening. I think we've done a pretty good job at trying to answer all those questions. Some of them maybe we have missed, but as we go through this, please, if you have a question, enter that into the chat. And again, one of the admin team will either respond to you privately and let you know that that's coming up and that'll be answered shortly, or they'll pause me and we'll make sure that that question gets answered or clarified. There will be a time to answer or ask any questions at the end as well. So here we go. This is our restart plan. Just as we get into this, our plan just had to be done in a very creative way. There are some changes that happened to the ones that came from the ministry with you here very shortly. But we also know that we've had to make some changes into our overall staffing plan and budget. We have made a lot more funds available for tuition assistance for families that there is one more review process happening next week. So if that is a worry for you or a concern for you, please make sure that you are reaching out and we can plug you into that application process. We also know that that COVID has been hard on a lot of our families. And for some of those families, it's meant that they've needed to make the choice not to attend an Iowa Christian school. So we have lost a number of students, which has also resulted in the need to make some staffing reductions. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that or the names of people, but as you were sharing who our teachers will be in our learning groups, that there may be a few names that are missing that you may have been aware of in the past. And I just want to take a moment just to talk about bubbles. We've been able to meet with most of our staff who have come back on campus, and we'll continue to do that with staff that have not returned to school yet. But just talking about this concept of bubbles, and we hear about this quite often in the messaging from our provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, and health minister, Adrian Dix. And we look at bubbles in the intent that they have described is that these bubbles are really groups of 6 to 10 people that we are exclusive with. And we know there's a lot of interpretation on what these bubbles may actually be. A lot of people use this, oh, okay, they're in my bubble kind of terminology, but yet they have maybe 5 or 6 different bubbles, and each of those bubbles produce 20 or more contacts. And so those really aren't bubbles. And I'm not saying this to criticize any families or what you are doing, but just to assure you that as we've been talking about staff and students returning, that staff have been asked to reflect on their bubbles, to look at what are our points of contact so that as we are getting ready to return to school, that we know that we are providing the safest place for our students to return to as well. We feel that if we can minimize our points of contact within the school as the adults who will be here, that just puts the safety of our students first. And so my encouragement for you though is to reflect on your situation and look at what your bubbles might be and if there's any changes that need to happen there. So sorry, 1 second. So you would have received an email a couple of hours ago with our draft restart plan. And the reason I say that it is a draft plan at this point is that all of the restart plans across the province need to be approved by the Ministry of Education. Ours was submitted to the ministry this afternoon, and we will hear back from them by August 26th if we need to make any changes or adjustments to that. So that's why it is a draft. We're hopeful that what we present will not need any changes, but just need you to be aware of that as well. And our whole restart plan was sort of framed around our theme from last year of beautiful work. We want to continue working towards the mission and vision of NCS, We want to provide safety and care for staff, students, and their families while continuing to provide great Christian education that is in alignment with the BC Restart Plan. So that's the lens in which this was created. That was our theme last year. We have a great theme coming up as well. But the concept of beautiful work just continues to apply so well to what we're doing and what we will continue to do. So this restart plan, it is compliant with the Ministry of Education and the Provincial Health Office directives. These are non-negotiable things that we have to put into place. We have a little bit of flexibility in how they are implemented, but all schools are mandated to return back to in-school, in-person learning. And there's a lot of operational measures that we've worked through those directives to make that possible. You may have heard in the news that there's this new orientation week happening within public schools where students won't return until September 10th, and some school districts have announced that students won't start classes until September 14th. We don't feel that we need to wait. We feel quite prepared. We feel quite confident in our plan, and we are really excited to welcome students back to in-person learning starting on September 8th. And we are going to be in what the Ministry of Education calls stage 2 of that restart plan. And just so it's really clear right from the start, we are not a distance learning school, and nor are we allowed to become a distance learning school. I think that was one of the most common questions that was submitted prior to the presentation tonight is, can we continue to offer remote learning or distance learning if we don't feel safe sending our students to school? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. But unless the ministry changes their direction to a stage 3, we are not authorized to provide distance learning. We are not an online school, and we cannot become one. And then why is our ministry and health office restarting schools? The reality is, it's a lot of our students, if they didn't come back for 3 weeks, have been out of school for over 175 days. I'm not sure how somebody muted me. Can you still hear me? Yeah? Okay. I just got a message that somebody muted me. Good job, whoever you are. Not sure how you did that, but there you go. So we know that 2/3 of our students haven't been in school. We know that school is a critical place for kids, for learning, for their mental and physical well-being. We know that getting kids back into school is important for our economy. Our provincial health officer has deemed that it is safe to do so with the control measures and things that are in place. So on July 29th, sorry, our ministry made an announcement that we would be starting in stage 2. And we were all just a little bit surprised with a very new direction for stage 2 from what we had previously been told stage 2 would look like. So if you recall, stage 2 about a month ago was fully on campus 100% of the time for K through 7. We had indicated that we would be making an application for an exception for our grade 8 students, and that high school would be on campus for only 2 days a week. So stage 2 is now full-time instruction for all students K to 12, and students put into learning groups of 60 for elementary and middle and 120 for high school. If we were to move to a stage 3, that's also changed, where it's 50% density target, meaning 50% of our students could be on campus at one time, and the learning group sizes are cut in half from a stage 2. So these were quite significant changes, And actually, we were quite excited about that. Number one, in stage two, it meant that we could get all of our students back onto school property and back into our classrooms. The rationale for you using these learning groups is that schools are a fairly well-controlled environment. We have a consistent set of people accessing our building. We're able to track who comes in and out really well. And through these learning groups, we're able to reduce the interactions between students and staff. So if there were to be any situations that needed to be dealt with, we would be able to limit interruptions to learning because of these different factors. We know it's going to look a little bit different across all of our divisions, but we also know that what happens during the school day, kids might be in a learning group size of 60, but in elementary, they're really going to be with their homeroom class for the vast majority of their day, meaning they're going to be in a normal elementary classroom with their teacher, and it's not going to feel a whole lot different. Middle school, there's some adjustments to the schedule, but I don't think students are going to feel a significant difference either. Secondary, we'll get into that. I think those are some of the other changes that happened there that will change a little bit for high school, but we're able to maintain a really great program for our high school kids. And I think it's really important to note that we know that there's a lot happening within our province and the numbers are rising and there's concerns there. And we know that students, even though they're in learning groups in school, what do they do when they're outside of school? Who are they hanging out with? They're obviously not going to hang out with just those kids that are in their learning group. And so there's going to be other points of contacts throughout all of that. But what we do know is that during the hours of school, we know who will be here. We know that we will be safe because we have the sanitizing procedures. We have the teaching and learning that'll happen around all of those personal measures, which I'll share with you. We're limiting interactions. And so I don't know that there's any place right now in our society that is able to as effectively have all of these things in place to create that safe of environment. And so that's why our public health office and our ministry has deemed that the schools are safe for students to return. So I'm going to just sort of move through a couple of things here fairly quickly with the different measures that we are required to have in place. And we know that there are provincial health measures. And so these are actions taken across society. So the mass gatherings of groups no more than 50, that still applies, but it doesn't apply to regular school activities. So we know that we're going to have more than 50 students here on campus. And that is actually okay. We can't gather with all the students in the gym though at one time. So it does limit some of the different events that we might hold, kind of like a chapel. We have 175 kids in high school or middle school. We can't bring them all together for a chapel. So we're looking at different ways of being able to do chapels through some videos and live feeds and maybe some in-person participating. And then community events, things like the fun fair. The fun fair, the way it's happened in the past, 1,200 people all arrive causing parking chaos and everything just can't happen. And so we're looking at creative ways of still engaging our community and helping people feel the amazing community that exists here at Nanaimo Christian School. Then there are personal measures, and these are actions that individuals can take. And we know in a school with younger kids and middle school and high school kids that this is a part that we just need to add in as a teaching piece. Kids need to learn and be held accountable to really good hand hygiene. We need to ensure that everybody understands what respiratory etiquette is and what that looks like. Physical distancing can be tough, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more and what that looks like within learning groups and different settings. We know that when we are sick, we need to stay home. That applies to students, that applies to staff. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a few minutes as well. And we know that we can wear personal protective equipment, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But one of the things that was announced on July 29th was that all middle school and high school students are now required to wear masks when they are in high traffic areas, and if they cannot properly physical distance. And so we'll help map out what exactly that looks like here in a few minutes too. Admin team, is there anything I need to pause for? I think we're good. So this handsome guy here is wearing a face mask, and we've chosen this style of mask as an option for a number of our teachers, and maybe some of our students will choose a mask of that style as well. It acts in the same way as a cloth non-medical mask would. It goes from the chin up rather than the forehead down. And we know as adults, when we are within our learning groups or outside of our learning groups and we're interacting with children, most of us are taller than them. And so the face shield that's open on the bottom doesn't provide that same kind of protection that this style of mask would provide. And so we've been able to secure a large number of this style of mask. We have different cloth masks available. We do suggest that you would look at getting masks for your children as well. Some people want to accessorize. You don't need a mask for every day of the week unless that's a preference, but students will be wearing masks in 12. If they don't have a mask, we'll provide one for them. Students in K-5, there's no requirement for them to wear masks. In fact, the recommendation from the health officer is that it may actually be more harmful for kids of that age group to wear masks because it's another thing that they're going to be touching more frequently. Their hands will be touching their face, they'll be adjusting and all of that, and that it might not be as good for K-5 students to be wearing a mask. But if any K-5 students choose to wear a mask, we would for sure support that and provide that if that is what they choose. And then we know there are environmental measures, and those things are outlined in the guide that was sent home for you as well. But those things are like being outdoors as much as possible. We've installed physical barriers in our front office spaces for when there is a need for people to enter the school. They can interact with our admin assistants in a safe way. We've enhanced our cleaning procedures just as we had done in June. We've confirmed that we've now got a full-time daytime janitor in place as well, who will just continue to be in the school and wiping down and sanitizing in between learning groups, high-touch surfaces and areas, make sure the washrooms are cleaned at least twice a day, and just making sure that those protocols are proper and in place. We increased our sanitizing stations when we returned to school in June already. We are now working to ensure that all classrooms have a hand sanitizer station in them, and all entrances and exits have one as well. Our ventilation system, we can't replace our HVAC systems. That would be incredibly pricey unless somebody wants to donate to that cause. We could then look at it. But we have taken out all of our reusable filters and replaced them with the highest quality non-reusable filters that we can. And so it's just another step that we're taking to ensure safety. We want to continue to use our gym. PE classes will be scheduled based on learning groups. There'll be hand hygiene procedures. Games that involve physical contact need to be avoided. And any equipment that is shared will need to be sanitized in between learning. A very common question that came out prior to tonight was, what about athletics? And as of right now, all in-school sports is suspended. As of September 15th, BC School Sports has put in an application to allow in-school sports to return. We know that we won't be able to play against other schools for the near future. That's going to get reviewed near the end of October, maybe November. But we know that we can athletic program within our school. We know that we probably have to do that based on learning groups where they won't need to physically distance in the same way, but minimize physical contact. And so we're looking at how we can run a modified athletic program under these parameters. And so there'll be more information coming out about that as we sort of develop those plans. And then we have administrative measures.
Flat out.
So administrative measures are policies and procedures and training that happen within the school. So we know that we have to change our sickness policies. We did that in June. We know that if anybody has traveled outside of Canada, they need to quarantine for 14 days. We know that parents need to assess their children daily for symptoms of cold or flu or COVID-19 before sending them to school. Staff need to do the same thing. Any staff or students that become sick during the school day will be sent home as soon as possible. And this is one where we know that it has the potential to be kind of tricky. You know, as staff, sometimes it's a whole lot easier to come to work than it is to prepare lesson plans or plan for somebody to take over our duties. As parents, we get it that sending your kid to school when they're kind of sick, but really not super sick, so that you don't have to take a day off work, and maybe that's an unpaid day off work, that you would just send them. And right now the directives is, and the requirement is that if we are showing any of those symptoms and we are sick, kids need to stay home, staff need to stay home. You are able to return back to school after a minimum of 10 days from the onset of any symptoms, if those 10 days have passed, if there's no fever and you haven't used like Tylenol to just sort of cover it up. Or you could also have a negative COVID-19 test and your symptoms have resolved. And that would help you to get back to school a little bit quicker. So I see a question in the chat there. When one child in a family is sick and has to stay home, do the siblings have to stay home? They do not have to stay home so long as they are also not showing any symptoms. If they're at school and the symptoms start to show up, then we'll send them home. I just glad there's seasonal allergies. If you know that you have seasonal allergies, that you do not need to stay home for seasonal allergies. And that'll get tricky because we don't want people to say, oh, it's just seasonal allergies as a reason as well. So we really want to make sure that people are doing those daily health checks as well. In the wording, and this will all be more detailed in our handbooks when those get sent out at the start of the school year, with a bit more details and specifics on that. A lingering cough afterwards, a dry cough after being ill, I mean, that could last for months. And so that is also not a reason to have to continue to stay home. And that'll all be mapped out for you. We know access to the campus, that right now only essential visitors are allowed on campus, or essential people on campus essential to the education of students. So that means right now people who just want to come in and say hi, that's not going to be possible. Parents, unless it's an essential reason, will have to interact with you, out in the parking lot or through phone call or virtual means, kind of how we're doing. Volunteering just can't happen in the way that we've done it in the past, which also means then that our parent participation program and the parent participation fee that would normally happen is not going to be in place for this coming school year. And if anybody is coming onto campus who is not part of a learning group, so if that means a parent needs to come on campus for an IEP meeting as an example, all parents or visitors will be required to wear a mask or a face shield when they come onto campus. We know lunch and recess is going to look a little bit different. We also know that students need to be outside getting a break, and we know that teachers need a chance to get coffee and go to the bathroom. Can't take away lunch and recess. We will have plans. We'll share some of that with you when we look specifically at the different divisions. Pickup and drop off are going to look very different for different divisions, and I'll get into those details as well by division. Water fountains are being replaced so that every single building has a water fountain that has a water bottle filling station. The mouthpiece on some of the older fountains is going to remain closed, but students can bring in refillable bottles, put a name on it, and within the next week, if you are a family that uses the school bus, you'll get some more information on what that looks like. We've been working with Smith Transportation to make sure that we can continue to provide bus service for NCS students. There's enhanced cleaning procedures, requirements for drivers to wear a mask or a face shield, health check vacations prior to riding the bus, preventing overcrowding for the bus. Middle school and high school students must wear a mask when they're on the bus. Assigned seating, loading and unloading procedures. So there's a number of different things that are in place so that we can continue to offer busing for our students in a safe way. We also know that the ministry has said that we can do field trips. There's a number of different parameters that would have to come around that. And I don't know that anybody's really eager to plan field trips at this point. I think we just want to get launched and started and just enjoy being back together with our students. And so that is something that we are not rushing to implement, but we do have the ability to proceed in that direction. And I think the same thing would apply to extracurricular. As we look at learning groups, we are able to offer some extracurricular things. And so if you're a family that also has a child in preschool, preschool will be starting up on September 8th. We have very similar cleaning and hygiene protocols in place, similar to the rest of the school. We have cleaning procedures in place for after the morning group and before the afternoon group. We have a drop-off entrance, a pickup entrance, and we have staggered that from the rest of the school as much as possible. Same thing for before and after school, which will be for K to 5 students only. We're adding in an additional space for before and after school care, which allows us to keep students together in their learning groups for before and after school care. And we'll get into those learning groups in a little bit. So if you're not quite understanding what that means and why that's important, that'll make a little bit more sense here very shortly. So what happens if there is a confirmed case of COVID-19? Well, first of all, our prayer is that that doesn't happen, but the reality is that is a possibility. So if a staff or a student is confirmed to have COVID-19, our first response is to contact our local public health office. They will then direct all of our next steps. And that might be contacting staff or students that were in close contact with that person. They'll direct who needs to self-isolate. They will direct us on whether that needs to be just students or a particular group of students, whether that needs to be a whole learning group. They may advise us to shut down for a day for a deep clean of the school. But because we've gone into these learning group models, the intent is that we would not have to shut down the entire school. Parents would obviously be in contact, but due to privacy, we would also try to keep who was infected as confidential as we possibly could. During this time, we would also then be providing for any students that would need to isolate due to a COVID-19 reason or possibly a learning group. that point in time, we would put in a plan to help them to ensure that educational continuity would continue. So plans for them to continue learning would be put into place. So the physical distancing, this is where it's changed a little bit in those stages. And this is a really important thing to wrap our heads around. So we know that when students are within their learning groups, K through 12, that they do not need to physically distance. Within those learning groups, they need to minimize physical contact. For students in middle school and high school, if there is a time where they need to interact with somebody outside of that learning group, outside of that designated group of 60, they would then have to physically distance, whether they are indoors or outdoors. So that includes any teachers that would need to rotate between learning groups. For example, a music teacher, they might be teaching music to multiple learning groups. And so in that situation, they would have to physically distance and wear a mask or a face shield. For elementary students, it's slightly different. That again, when they are in their learning groups, they do not need to physically distance. They need to minimize physical contact. If they are outdoors with another learning group, they don't need to physically distance. They need to minimize physical contact. If they are indoors, they need to physically distance with a learning group that's not their own. We've made a decision though as an admin team to not allow our learning groups to interact outside. The logistics, like, I don't know if you can picture this, but every single staff person would need to know which student is part of every learning group. And if students in different learning groups are getting too close, we would have to prevent that from happening. And that is just a nightmare to try to manage consistently. And so the easiest thing and the safest thing is that all of our learning groups will interact with their learning group. And we won't interact together. And then when we are in middle school and high school, we'll look at sort of recess and lunch times here when we look at that. And there's some slight differences for middle and high school. So. We also know that a global pandemic is hard on people. And if it's hard on adults, it's also hard on students. And so we have increased our counseling team. We've added some additional time to our counseling team. We've created a counseling office in our building A, which is available for our K-5 students. We've got a counseling office in our middle school and high school building as well. And we are implementing different curriculum across middle school, high school, and different curriculum across elementary, in which students will engage in social emotional learning activities. All of our staff will be participating on August 27th in a professional development day as well, around this whole topic of social emotional learning and caring well and supporting our students. Our hope is that we get to stage 1 of the BC restart plan for schools at some point, but we also know that we will not move to stage 1 until there is a vaccine or a level of immunity in place that allows us to safely do so. So if you've listened to any of the media announcements and releases from our Minister of Education, the language has been a little bit ambiguous, but also sort of indicative that this is likely for the entire school year, that we won't be in a stage 1 learning situation. Our prayer is that we're not in a stage 3 either. But when we get to that stage 1, that'll be a point where we truly celebrate a number of different things. So, Mrs. Gillespie, you've just responded to somebody, and there you fixed it. There you go. Ignore me. There you go. All right, here's maybe the number one question that has been asked from parents. Am I required to send my children to school? The really short answer to that is yes, you are required to send your child to school. Um, in stage 2, full-time instruction is available, and so that is the expectation. However, you as a parent also have a little bit of choice. You have the ability to homeschool. So meaning you as the parent or caregiver would be responsible for planning, preparing, teaching, assessing, selecting learning resources, activities, and holding students accountable to completing that work. If you are a student in high school working in a homeschooling environment, you're not able to receive a BC Dogwood diploma. You can still graduate, just not with the BC Dogwood diploma. And if you wanted to return to NCS at some point, then our policy right now, our current policy is that all students coming from a homeschooling environment need an assessment to confirm their grade level placement is still appropriate. So homeschooling is an option for some families. If you're considering homeschooling, please get in touch with me. I've got some ideas that you may be interested in hearing before you would make that decision. The other option for you is you may also choose to sign up for distance learning. We are not a distance learning school, so we can't offer that under a stage 2, but there are multiple distance learning schools to choose from. And in that environment, all learning becomes remote. There are numerous in-school opportunities if you're in a distance learning school that would not necessarily be available to students. A good example of that could be athletics. If you're in a distance learning school, can you play basketball? There are times where we've had roster spots that were available, and students in online school have been able to join some of our sports teams, but they can't take a spot from one of our current students. So it's on a case-by-case basis. In one space, we would look at that, but it's not a guarantee. But again, if you are looking at considering distance learning as an option, please come in and talk to me, and we can help you make the best choice for your children. With that said, just to make you aware, most distance learning schools across the province are in a state where they are starting to create waiting lists because of they are at capacity. So it might be a little bit difficult to find a distance learning option at this point. If you're following the chat, there's some good questions there about vaccines and some good answers from the admin team. So you can check that out as well. A comment there that several homeschool boards are not accepting new students since they are full. If that applies to you and you can't find a location, please come and talk to me, and I have some ideas that might be helpful. So. So what if my child or family member is immunocompromised? And trust me, I totally get and understand this, that there is worry for some of our families about sending students with underlying health conditions back to school, or maybe they live with somebody who is high risk. According to our provincial health officer in the BC Centre for Disease Control, most children who are immunocompromised can return to in-class instruction because of the safety measures that are in place in schools. Protective self-isolation is only recommended for children who are severely immunocompromised. And if you feel that applies to your student or to your family situation, we definitely want to talk with you and look at what a program could look like. If there are significant issues and it is not safe for your student to be at school, of course we want to support that with a program at home. That's going to look different for each student. We would want to have that sort of directed by your family doctor to help make that decision. We will work with you, and then part of that is the conversation has to be, if you need to protectively self-isolate by not coming to school, have you been consistent in protectively self-isolating in your other points of contacts outside of school? And I think you can see sort of where we're coming from on that. We definitely want to make sure that our students are safe, and if the need is there, we will do everything we can to support that student. But if you are asking the student to put together a home program because you don't feel safe, but yet you are hanging out at large group gatherings and doing things that would not sort of reflect that there is a medical concern or a high risk concern outside of school, then it wouldn't make sense that you would need that at school either. So there needs to be a consistent lifestyle application in that protective self-isolation as well. So if you want to reach out, if you have any questions on that, would love to meet with you and have that conversation too. I was turning my page. Any questions there? All right. Well, this is our K-5 plan. And if you've taken a look in the document there before joining in tonight, you'd see this in there as well. But stage 2 K-5 is all kids able to be here 5 days per week. And we have created 6 learning groups in K-5. One is a kindergarten group. We have 2 grade 1-2 learning groups, which is 4 classes. We have 4 grade 3-4 learning groups, or 4 grade 3-4 classes separated into 2 learning groups. And then we have 1 grade 5 learning group. So you can see the names of the teachers that are beside that there. And I just saw a comment there about class lists, I believe. Oh, that's for class lists, sorry. We will be meeting as an admin team, but right now the thought is that we would actually send out these class lists and learning groups a little bit sooner than we have in the past. Normally we've waited till just before the long weekend before school would start. But in this situation, with all the unknowns and also maybe that extra layer of anxiety that families and students are feeling, that getting these lists will maybe be part of helping to alleviate some of those things. I say that also knowing that class lists are complicated at the best of times. Throw in a pandemic where we now need to ensure that all kids are with a teacher that we know will be a good fit, that they're in spaces where they're going to be supported as well as they can, where they have at least one friend with them so those social connections are there. And now we got to limit that to 1 class and a group of 60. It's that much more complicated. Every year we get some requests of, can we move our child? This year, I just do not see any way that we can honor any additional requests. We've gotten feedback from parents. We've tried to honor that feedback, and we have poured over these lists to make sure that they are compliant with ministry expectations and still provide a great classroom for students and social connections as well. So in K-5, actually in all divisions, there will be a daily health check. We will let you know how that process will go. Some schools are sending home daily. Some schools are having parents fill out a form.
And that's all. Like, honestly,
some schools are just sort of trusting that parents will do this and have provided one list for them to use every day. But these are the kind of questions that you can expect will happen in a daily health check. So we know drop-off will be a staggered drop-off for K-5 students. Likely it will be sort of at 8:10, 8:20, and 8:30 each morning. And all learning groups will be assigned a different door to enter. So as students get dropped off, they don't congregate in the playgrounds or in the atom ball pits. They go directly to their assigned door and proceed directly to their class. They'll obviously come in, they'll sanitize their hands, go to their classrooms and wait until the school day starts. Pickup's a little bit trickier. And so we are going to test out an app called Fetch Kids. One of the things we need to do is ensure that students are not overcrowding during these pickup times. Because when kids are going to crowd together while waiting for rides, that's when they're going to interact outside of their learning groups. And we need to prevent that from happening. So parents, will give you instructions on how to use the app. We're just in the process of getting that set up. Essentially how it works, you install the app, your kids are assigned to you, and when you are leaving your home to drive to the school for pickup, you click on the app and you click on your way. That gives us an estimated arrival time for you. They work with Google Maps to be able to give us that arrival time. And then when you enter the parking lot or when you are near the school, we will get notified, and each classroom teacher will get notified that you are now here, and they will send your student out or students out, and they will meet you in the parking lot, and they will come out the doors and go directly to your vehicle because you are already there. We know it might need to be staggered a little bit as well. We'll probably have to be a little bit flexible. We'll test it out and maybe sort of tweak that as we go until we've got it working well. So that is the plan to just sort of help with pickup with school pickup. We're pretty confident that it's not going to make the parking lot more chaotic. I'm not suggesting that it might make it a whole lot better, but it does prevent that overcrowding. That's really important, that we do prevent that.
James, there's just a few questions on the chat about carpooling and just parents of different age children. So I just want to clarify, in June, we had very fixed times by last name for families so that you could come at the same time, but learning groups, we now have to organize things by learning groups, which could be quite different. So the morning time will be, like James said, more of that window, and we're avoiding crowding by the fact that kids are going directly to their class. So there will be no waiting in the parking lot. You won't have to wait for different times, but things will officially start at different times for different divisions. So Wayne, I'm just seeing a few more questions in the chat. So the morning will be that window of time, and you will be given a window, and hopefully your whole family, all kids of all divisions, could go to a class. And that way there's no crowding, there's no hanging around, and there's no you having to wait in the parking lot. And then the Fetch Kids app will allow for you as a parent to pick up your kids of multiple age divisions, or even as a carpool, you would need to go a few extra steps to make sure that you have those kids on your pickup, but that could happen still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. As a parent, you can assign the rights to pick up your children to another parent that is in your contact list. And so when, let's say I had a kid in grade 3 and Cheryl was going to pick up my child at the same time. I'll use Kim Kirkbride instead. So Kim was going to pick up my child at the same time as her 3 kids. I could assign Kim the ability to pick up my kid on that day. So when Kim is leaving her house to pick up her kids, she would click on that. My kid has been assigned to her car for that day. And so the teacher of my student would also be notified when Kim arrives into the parking lot, and they would then go out into there. If you have any pickup change requests that you need to make or let teachers know, you can also do that through the app rather than calling the main office. And then as teachers have their Fetch Kids open on their computer to know when parents have arrived, they'll see any notes or special information that you would have put in there as well. So yeah, we feel it's worth giving a shot. We don't know if it is the perfect or the right solution, but we know that we need to be looking for a solution. Within K-5, we also know kindergarten's a pretty important touch point, entry point for students. For a lot of these kids, they miss the last 3 months of preschool and that transition into kindergarten as well. So we're looking at some different procedures for kindergarten students to allow them, parents maybe to pick up at a doorway. One of the suggestions is, could we have small set of steps outside a window with a slide so that they can enter the classroom, which actually seems like a pretty fantastic idea. And so just some ways for parents to be able to pick up kids in kindergarten in a bit of a different environment. So we'll keep you posted on that as those plans unfold. What does my kid do if they are walking to school and walking back home? As a parent, we would know that information from you already, so they would not need to, you would not need to indicate that you are coming to pick them up. We would be aware that they are walking home, and they would just be dismissed at that first dismissal group and be able to walk home. And we may just need to remind them that once they leave, they need to start walking right away. They can't hang around and play atom ball or hang out at the playgrounds like many of our kids have done in the past. And just another question about the app there, I think it's a good one, is can we park on the street? Yes, as long as you have indicated to your students where you will be waiting for them. We can set the radius of how far away you will be when we get notified. So if we have cars on the street and we've set that radius, it'll still notify us that you are here, and we'll still send kids out. So our middle school plan, again, 100% of kids, 5 days per week. And we have 3 different learning groups in our middle school. So we have 4 grade 6, 7 classrooms forming 2 learning groups. And Lucas Rivers and Angelina Wickerink will be the primary teachers in learning group A. A new teacher, Ross Doherty and Hannah Taves, will be in our grade 6, 7 second learning group. And then Nathan Johnson and Gil Hosini, which is Mr. Hosini and Mrs. Gillespie, will be part of our 3rd learning group in middle school. As I mentioned before, masks must be worn in all common spaces for middle school students and high school students. That includes hallways, at recess and lunch breaks. They'll be able to eat lunch within a classroom with their learning group. So I haven't tried eating lunch with a mask on. I hear it's really difficult. So we're going to make that a little bit easier for students as well. Again, students can buy their own mask or school will provide one for them. And masks are not required when they are in their classes unless they are in a mixed learning group and distancing is not possible. They need to maintain or minimize physical contact. But when they are outside of that learning group, they must maintain physical distance and wear a mask. And that's important because middle school and high school students, their lunch times are a similar time. They may be outside in some of those same spaces. We'll make sure that they are physically distancing, but they will have to wear a mask during those break times if they choose to leave their assigned learning group spaces. Some kids we think are actually not going to want to wear a mask, and so they are going to just stay inside their learning group spaces or designated areas. Don't have to. We have done a lot to make sure that we are not sharing student spaces, meaning that teachers are going to move to students rather than students moving to teachers as much as possible. When it's not possible, there's cleaning procedures that are in place for that. Any teachers that are teaching students not part of their learning group, again, so middle school, it could be a music class with Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith would need to physically distance from students. We have said that teachers in that situation do not need to wear a mask if they are instructing at the front of the room, but if they are going to come closer to students in a physically distanced way, that they also then need to wear a mask. So we know that the middle school schedule is school start of 8:25. And that's important because high school starts at 8:35, so there's a bit of a staggered start there. Lunch is 12:30 to 1:10, and dismissal for middle school is at 3:10. So we've staggered that over between the high school. Middle school rotations are based on their homeroom, so they can continue to be with their learning groups. And exploratories are still going to happen, and we'll focus on themes. They will remain in their learning groups. They may have different teachers, and they will run for approximately 4 to 6 weeks at a time. As students in middle school enter the building, each learning group will have a different door that they enter through. And so that's going to allow us to prevent crowding and a quicker entry process for middle school students. When they enter the building, they confirm that they've completed their daily health check. They sanitize their hands, they put on their mask, they proceed to their locker, and then straight to their homeroom. Once they are in their homeroom, they can remove their mask. Middle school students will be using the Fetch Kids app as well. And then also transitions there. Daily health checks are across the campus, all K through 12. And transitions throughout the day, just so that we are managing traffic flow, so that we have no classrooms of students sort of coming in a door and exiting a door at the exact same time. Students will move to different parts of the school through different doorways only. So for example, a middle school student heading to the band room or the music room would use the 3rd floor staircase on the right side of the building if you're looking at the building. And so we've designated transition space or transition plans for moving to those different spaces. All right, high school.
There was a question about hot lunches and popcorn days that I actually don't know the answer to. Would we still be able to do those, or will there be none of those this year?
So right now, the popcorn days are probably a little less likely because we would be preparing and packaging and sending. And in order to do that, we would need to put in a WorkSafe BC safety plan as if we were a restaurant. So maybe at some point we will look at that, but I think we just want to make sure that we are doing school well first before adding in those things. A hot lunch program, if we are using the Munch-a-Lunch again, and it's a different company preparing the food and sending the food, and it comes pre-packaged, we should be able to continue to provide those hot lunches. But again, it's kind of one of those things. It's a really nice thing to have, and we'll add that in when we feel we're ready and have the capacity to do it. We don't want to take on too many things. We've got a lot of things to figure out in the first couple of weeks of school here, for sure. I just had a private question. Will lockers be divided in sections by learning groups? And yes, the answer to that is yes. As much as possible, and it pretty much works out, is that students' lockers are based on their learning group.
There's a question about band that might be easier just for me to answer rather than typing. The high school band will still be happening as an elective, and mostly then the kids who are actually going to be taking that, because we have student enrollment forms already, we actually know that all but 2 are students who would be in the same learning group. So we're able to, it's mostly a grade 11, 12 band, and we would be able to distance the other ones in different learning groups. And then there will be no band for middle school this year.
I was leaving for the dramatic pause there for a moment. Yes, it is. And that's something we can continue to pray about, that that we get to a stage one a little bit quicker, and we can look at how we add those things back into place. I do see a question there. Can students come and walk through with the parent and staff to see their entry door, locker area, etc.? I'm going to add that we have an admin planning day tomorrow. I'm going to add that to our agenda to see how we can do that. Right now, a parent would not be deemed an essential visitor to the school. So to make that possible for everybody might be difficult, but we've gotten pretty creative over the last 5 months on how we can help kids with these transitions. And so we'll brainstorm some ideas on how we can make that happen. Well, sorry, high school. Two learning groups in high school. Those groups can be 120 students. And we know that grade 9, 10s and grade 11 and 12s, we have enough numbers in there to offer those 2 learning groups. And as much as possible, we have limited students, we have limited teachers to 1 learning group as much as possible. We also don't want to compromise quality of education either. And some of our specialist teachers need to teach within those subject areas. And so that just sort of makes sense. We want the most competent and best teacher in a specific subject area at the high school level to still have the ability to do that. And so, so there are some instances where teachers will cross over and they'll have to be physically distanced and wear a face mask or a shield. And yes, I'm just seeing the chat there, and we are looking at how we are going to do a new student orientation. We know that's an important piece to welcome all of our new students, and the format's going to have to look different. So again, we will reach out to parents once we have those plans in place. So high school, similar to middle school, it's the masks in hallways and at recess and lunch breaks. They can eat their lunch in the classroom with their learning groups. I think one of the hardest parts for our high school students is that when they are at school, we're essentially a closed campus, meaning that they cannot leave at lunchtime and then return back. During the hours of the school day, that is where we have these controls in place that they are not interacting outside of those learning groups. So we can't have the off campus in that same way. Clearly, if students have appointments, that's a different thing altogether, where they need to leave and maybe return because of appointments. But students can continue to order through Skip the Dishes or DoorDash, or, a parent, if you want to deliver food for your kids, we can do things that way. Again, masks will be provided, or they can provide their own. They don't need to wear the mask when they're in those learning groups. But when they're outside of those learning groups, they need to wear those masks to maintain physical distance. We do have a cleaning procedure in place for learning spaces. For example, we know that our students in the design studio or in our science lab, we're going to have students from different learning groups using those spaces. So we have cleaning procedures in place for in between those different learning groups as well. And that'll be mapped out a little bit more I think it's mapped out a little bit more in our guide here, and it'll be in our handbooks as well. And teachers will be trained on those procedures also. So high school, a little bit of a change to the schedule. They'll start at 8:35, 10 minutes after middle school. Their lunch is 12:35 to 1:15. Dismissal is at 3:15. So again, when they arrive, they'll have assigned doors that they enter through, different for grade 9, 10, and different for grade 11 and 12. And again, they will come to school, confirm their daily health check, put on a mask, sanitize, proceed to their locker, and then to their homeroom. And once they're in their homeroom or their first class, then they can take off their mask. And again, the transitions throughout the day, as students are leaving some of those classrooms for some of that cleaning procedures, they'll need to hand sanitize, maybe wipe down tables or their chair, kind of like going to a gym. If you use the elliptical, you need to wipe it down before the next person. And so as they're transitioning to different classrooms throughout the day, they'll have to put on their mask as they are moving through the hallway. So it's a ton of information We get that. We've had a very short amount of time to kind of process all of these things. Really thankful for our admin team and the work they've done in planning and preparing and discussing and putting what I think is a pretty solid plan forward. I'm excited that we are going to be open. We are 100% ready to be flexible. And in my opinion, and the opinion of the Public Health Office, that this is a safe place for your kids to be. And so we look forward to welcoming them back to school. So, questions? I'm just looking at the chat here. Students who develop symptoms at school. Yes, Kim's answered that question. They'll be sent to an isolated space, a mask to wear until they can be picked up as soon as possible. And again, if there's any sort of greater reason for us to be concerned, we would then reach out to our local health office and they would direct our next steps.